The harsh midday sun beat down on Molly Bennett as she clutched her infant son to her chest. The worn wooden bench beneath her offering little comfort in the dusty main street of Chico, California. It was 1876, a full decade after the Civil War had ended, but the struggle for survival in the West continued unabated for a young widow with no family, no money, and nowhere to go. Her husband's grave was 3 days fresh, and the landlord's eviction notice had followed swiftly upon news of James Bennett's death in a mining accident. "Hush now, little James," she whispered as the baby stirred fretfully against her shoulder. "Someone will come. Someone must come." The stage coach that had brought her to town had departed hours ago, leaving her alone with her small carpetbag and the child. She had used the last of her coins for the ticket, gambling everything on a rumor that Chico needed seamstresses for its growing population. But upon arrival, she discovered the position filled, the boarding house full, and her prospects dwindling with each passing minute. "Madam," a deep voice startled her. "You've been sitting there since morning." Molly looked up to see a tall man blocking the sun. His face was shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but she could make out a strong jawline dusted with several days' worth of stubble. His clothes were trail-worn but clean denim trousers tucked into scuffed leather boots, a faded blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up revealing tanned forearms, and a leather vest that had seen better days. "I'm waiting," she said, lifting her chin with what little pride she had left. "For what?" he asked, his voice less gruff than his appearance would suggest. "A miracle, I suppose," Molly admitted, too tired to maintain pretenses. The man sighed, pushing his hat back to reveal a face weathered by sun and wind but not yet hardened by age. He couldn't have been more than 30. His eyes were a startling blue against his tan skin. "Name's Xavier Colt," he said, extending a calloused hand. "Most folks call me Zav." "Molly Bennett," she replied, shifting the baby to free her hand. "And this is James." Xavier nodded at the infant. "Your husband died in the Silver Peak mine. Tunnel collapse." Xavier removed his hat completely, holding it against his chest for a moment. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Bennett, that's a rough hand to be dealt." "Please call me Molly," she said. "Mrs. Bennett was my mother-in-law and she never much cared for me anyway." She hadn't meant to sound bitter, but exhaustion was wearing away her filters. "You got people here in Chico?" "No, I came for work, but—" She gestured vaguely at the street. Xavier looked thoughtful, then glanced at the setting sun. "Night's coming. You can't stay on this bench." Molly's stomach clenched with fear. She had nowhere to go, no one to turn to, and a baby who needed shelter. "I'll manage." "No, madam, you won't." His tone wasn't unkind, but it was firm. "Not with that little one." He seemed to be wrestling with a decision. Finally, he squared his shoulders. "I've got a place outside town. It's nothing fancy, just a small ranch I'm working to build up. There's a room you can use for tonight at least." He must have seen the wariness in her eyes because he quickly added, "My sister's things are still there. She moved to Sacramento last year to get married. You and the baby can stay there while you figure things out." Molly hesitated, weighing her limited options. This stranger could be dangerous, but the alternative was spending the night on the bench or wandering the streets of an unfamiliar town with her infant. "Why would you help us?" she asked. Xavier replaced his hat, adjusting it slightly. "My ma always said you judge a town by how it treats those in need." He shrugged. "Seems Chico's failing that test today. I aim to do better." As Molly considered his offer, baby James began to cry in earnest. His tiny face reddened with hunger and exhaustion. "He needs feeding and a proper place to sleep," Xavier observed quietly. "My wagon's just down the street. I've got supplies to pick up, then we can head to my place." Molly bit her lip, then nodded slowly. "Just for tonight." Xavier held out his hand again, this time to help her up. "You stay as long as you need, Mrs. Bennett. That's a promise." The decision made, Molly gathered her meager belongings and followed Xavier down the dusty street. His wagon was simple but well-maintained, with a team of 2 healthy-looking horses waiting patiently in the late afternoon heat. Xavier helped her climb onto the wooden seat, careful not to disturb the now quieting baby. As they set off down the main street, Molly couldn't help but wonder if she'd made the right choice. But as the town of Chico fell behind them and the rolling hills opened up before them, she felt something she hadn't experienced in weeks' hope. The ranch was modest but well kept, a small main house with a covered porch, a barn, and several fenced areas for livestock. As Xavier brought the wagon to a stop, Molly took in the peaceful setting, the mountains visible in the distance. "It's not much," Xavier said, jumping down from the wagon. "But it's home." He helped her down carefully, then led her to the house. Inside was simple but clean: a main room with a stone fireplace, a wooden table with 4 chairs, a small kitchen area, and doors leading to what she presumed were bedrooms. "My sister's room is this way," Xavier said, opening a door to reveal a small but comfortable-looking bedroom with a neatly made bed, a chest of drawers, and a small window that looked out onto the surrounding countryside. "There's a cradle in the storage room," he continued. "My sister was expecting when she left, but—" He didn't finish the sentence, but Molly understood the implication of loss. "I'm sorry," she said softly. Xavier nodded. "I'll fetch it for the little one. There's a pump out back for water, and I'll get a fire going for you to heat some." "Thank you, Mr. Colt. I don't know how to repay your kindness." "Xavier," he corrected. "And there's no debt. Get some rest. We'll talk more in the morning." As promised, he brought in the cradle as well as fresh water and kindling for the fire. He showed her where everything was kept, then excused himself to tend to his horses and the few cattle in the nearest pasture. Alone in the quiet house, Molly fed baby James, bathed him using the warmed water, and settled him in the cradle. The simple domesticity of these actions in a proper house, after weeks of hardship, brought tears to her eyes. She wiped them away quickly, refusing to give in to self-pity. Later, Xavier returned with a simple meal of beans, bread, and coffee. They ate in comfortable silence, both too tired for conversation. When they finished, he showed her where to find extra blankets, then retreated to his own room at the other end of the small house. That night, as Molly lay in the unfamiliar bed listening to her son's steady breathing, she felt the weight of uncertainty pressing down on her. But there was also something else: the stirring of determination. She would find a way forward, for James's sake if not for her own. Outside her window, the vast California sky was filled with more stars than she'd ever seen, a glittering canopy over this strange new chapter of her life. The next morning, Molly woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the unfamiliar sound of someone moving quietly in the kitchen. For a moment, she was disoriented. Then memories of the previous day flooded back. She glanced quickly at the cradle. James was still asleep, his tiny chest rising and falling peacefully. She dressed quickly in her second dress, the only other one she owned, and tried to make herself presentable. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple knot, and she splashed water on her face from the basin that had been left on the dresser. When she emerged from the bedroom, Xavier was at the stove, stirring something in a cast iron pot. He looked up when he heard her. "Morning," he said. "Hope I didn't wake you. There's coffee if you'd like some." "Thank you," Molly said, suddenly conscious of being alone with this man she barely knew. In the morning light, she could see him more clearly. His dark hair was neatly combed, though a wayward lock fell across his forehead. The blue eyes that had seemed so striking yesterday were even more so today, set in a face that was handsome in a rugged way. "I've made some porridge," Xavier said, interrupting her thoughts. "Nothing fancy, but it's filling." They ate breakfast with the same comfortable silence as the night before. James woke partway through, and Molly excused herself to feed him. When she returned, Xavier was cleaning up. "I need to go into town today," he said, drying his hands on a towel. "You're welcome to come along if you'd like to look for work, or you can stay here and rest." Molly considered. She desperately needed work, but the prospect of facing rejection again so soon was daunting, and James had slept better than he had in weeks. "If it's not an imposition, I think we'll stay here today. James needs the rest, and frankly, so do I." Xavier nodded. "No imposition at all. Make yourself at home. There's a vegetable garden out back if you want fresh greens for dinner." After he left, Molly took stock of her surroundings more thoroughly. The house was simply furnished but had everything needed for comfortable living. There were signs of a woman's touch, probably Xavier's sister, in the curtains at the windows and the braided rug before the fireplace. She found herself tidying up, then exploring the kitchen more thoroughly. The pantry was modestly stocked with staples: flour, sugar, coffee, beans, and preserved goods. On impulse, she decided to bake bread, something she hadn't done since before James was born. The familiar routine of mixing, kneading, and shaping the dough was soothing. As the bread rose, she turned her attention to the rest of the house, sweeping floors and dusting surfaces. She found mending that had been set aside, shirts with torn seams and socks with holes, and set to work with the needle and thread she found in a small sewing basket. By the time Xavier returned in the late afternoon, the house smelled of fresh bread, and the stew Molly had started with vegetables from the garden and dried meat from the pantry. The mended clothes were folded neatly on the table. Xavier paused in the doorway, clearly surprised. "You've been busy," he said, setting down the packages he'd brought. "It seemed the least I could do," Molly replied. "I hope you don't mind that I used your supplies for bread and stew." "Mind?" Xavier's face broke into a genuine smile, the first she'd seen from him. It transformed his features, softening the lines around his eyes and revealing a dimple in his left cheek. "I haven't had fresh bread in months." He moved to the table and saw the mended clothes. "You did all this?" "I was a seamstress before I married," Molly explained. "It's how I was hoping to find work in Chico." Xavier picked up one of his shirts, examining the nearly invisible repair. "This is fine work, Mrs. Bennett." "Molly," she reminded him. "Molly," he agreed. "Well, I might have some news that will interest you. I spoke with Mrs. Whitaker at the general store. Her daughter is getting married next month, and she's in need of someone to help with the wedding dress and trousseau. I mentioned you might be able to help." Hope flared in Molly's chest. "Really? She'd consider me." "She said you could come by tomorrow morning if you'd like to discuss it." Xavier began unpacking his purchases: coffee, sugar, a bolt of calico fabric, and to Molly's surprise, a small wooden toy, a simple carved horse. He held the toy out somewhat awkwardly. "Thought the boy might like this when he's a bit older." Touched by the gesture, Molly took the toy. "That's very thoughtful, thank you." Xavier cleared his throat. "I also brought this," he said, revealing the bolt of blue calico. "Thought you might want something new for yourself, what with the interview tomorrow." Molly stared at the fabric. It was a simple cotton, nothing fancy, but it was a bright, clear blue that reminded her of summer skies. More importantly, it represented possibility: a new dress, a new job, a new start. "I can't accept this," she said, though her fingers itched to touch the cloth. "Consider it an advance on your first wages," Xavier said pragmatically. "You'll need to look your best to get that job, and from what I can see, you've only got the 2 dresses." Molly blushed, embarrassed by her poverty but grateful for his matter-of-fact approach. Thank you. I'll pay you back as soon as I'm able. That evening, after dinner and after James was settled for the night, Molly sat by the fire and began cutting the pattern for a new dress. Xavier sat across from her in a wooden rocking chair, reading a well-worn copy of The Last of the Mohicans. The domestic scene struck Molly with its normality. How quickly she had adjusted to this strange arrangement, living in the home of a man she barely knew, sharing meals and quiet evenings as if they were old friends or even family. "May I ask you something, Xavier?" she said, looking up from her work. He marked his place in the book with a finger. "Of course. Why are you doing all this for us? The truth, please." Xavier considered her question, rocking slowly. "The simple answer is that it was the right thing to do. You needed help, I could provide it." "And the complicated answer," he sighed, closing the book. "I know what it's like to be alone in the world. My parents died of fever when I was 16. My sister was just 12. If not for neighbors who took us in until I could work our farm, we might not have survived." He stared into the fire. "When I saw you sitting on that bench, holding your baby, looking like you'd reached the end of your rope, I remembered what it felt like, to be adrift, to need someone to reach out a hand." The vulnerability in his admission touched Molly deeply. "I'm sorry about your parents, and grateful that you reached out to us." Xavier nodded, then changed the subject. "Tell me about yourself, Molly Bennett. Where are you from originally?" "Ohio," she said. "A small town near Columbus. I was working as an apprentice to a dressmaker when I met James, my husband, not the baby," she clarified with a small smile. "He had big dreams of striking it rich in the gold fields. We came west 3 years ago, but ended up at Silver Peak instead of the gold fields. The gold rush was already fading by the time we arrived. James took work at the silver mine to save money, but—" She trailed off, the familiar ache of loss tightening her chest. "Mining's dangerous work," Xavier said quietly. "Yes." Molly focused on her cutting, the rhythmic snip of the scissors a distraction from painful memories. "And now here I am, starting over again." "You're not alone this time," Xavier said, then quickly added, "I mean, you have friends now, in Chico." The assurance warmed her, despite her uncertainty about the future. "Thank you for saying that." They lapsed into silence again, but it was comfortable, each lost in their own thoughts as the fire crackled and the night deepened around the small ranch house. The next morning, Molly donned her best dress, the one that wasn't quite as faded as the other, and prepared to meet Mrs. Whittaker. She'd stayed up late working on her new dress, but hadn't finished it yet. Still, she was determined to make a good impression. Xavier insisted on driving her into town. "I need supplies anyway," he said, though Molly suspected he was being thoughtful rather than practical. James was bundled up against the morning chill, content in Molly's arms as the wagon made its way into Chico. The town looked different in the bright morning light, busier, more prosperous than it had seemed from her lonely bench. The main street was lined with businesses: a bank, several saloons, a hotel, the general store, and various shops catering to the needs of the growing community. Xavier pulled the wagon up in front of Whittaker's general store. "I'll be around town if you need me," he said. "Take your time with Mrs. Whittaker." Molly nodded, suddenly nervous. "Thank you." She entered the store, the bell above the door announcing her arrival. The interior was well stocked with everything from food staples to tools, fabric, ready-made clothing, and household goods. A plump, middle-aged woman with graying hair pulled into a severe bun was arranging bolts of fabric on a shelf. "Mrs. Whittaker?" Molly asked hesitantly. The woman turned, her shrewd eyes taking in Molly and the baby in one comprehensive glance. "You must be Mrs. Bennett. Xavier Colt mentioned you yesterday." She approached, wiping her hands on her apron. "Let me see those hands of yours." Startled, Molly shifted James to one arm and extended her free hand. Mrs. Whittaker examined it carefully, noting the slight calluses from years of needlework. You've worked with fine fabrics before. Yes, madam. I apprenticed with a dressmaker in Ohio for 4 years before coming west. And wedding gowns? 3, madam, including the dressmaker's daughter's gown, which had 1,600 seed pearls hand-sewn onto the bodice and train. Mrs. Whittaker's eyebrows rose slightly. Impressive. My Margaret is set on having the finest wedding Chico has ever seen. The fabric is ordered from San Francisco silk satin and French lace, not materials to be trusted to just anyone. I understand, Molly said. If you'd like, I could show you some samples of my work. I have a few pieces in my bag. Mrs. Whittaker nodded, and Molly carefully retrieved several handkerchiefs she had embroidered during her pregnancy, as well as a small sampler showing different types of stitches and techniques. The older woman examined them closely, her expression revealing nothing. Finally, she looked up. These are well done. Very well done, in fact. She glanced at baby James, who was starting to fuss. Your little one needs attention. There's a chair in the back room you can use. We'll talk terms when you're finished. Relieved, Molly followed Mrs. Whittaker to a small room behind the store where she could feed James in privacy. As she sat with her son, she allowed herself to hope that this might be the beginning of their new life in Chico. When she returned to the main store, Mrs. Whittaker was waiting with a cup of tea. Sugar, she offered, gesturing to a small bowl. No, thank you, Molly replied, settling James more comfortably in her arms. I'll be direct, Mrs. Bennett. I need someone skilled and reliable. The wedding is 6 weeks away, and there's the dress, 2 bridesmaid gowns, and various items for Margaret's trousseau to be completed. Mrs. Whittaker sipped her own tea. I can offer you room and board above the store, plus $2 a week. Molly's heart sank. The wage was fair, but living above the store with a baby would be difficult. James would inevitably cry and disturb the customers. That's very generous, she began carefully, but I'm concerned about my son. He's still so young and sometimes he cries at night. Mrs. Whittaker frowned. I hadn't considered that. The space upstairs is directly above the store. Customer complaints would be bad for business. Molly's hopes began to crumble. This had been her only prospect. Perhaps. She started, then hesitated, unsure if her idea was appropriate. Perhaps I could work from Mr. Colt's ranch. I could come into town for fittings and consultations, but do the actual sewing there. Mrs. Whittaker's eyebrows shot up. You're staying at Xavier Colt's place. Alone. The implication was clear, and Molly felt her cheeks flush. It's a temporary arrangement, completely proper. Mr. Colt has been kind enough to offer his sister's former room while I look for work. The older woman studied her for a long moment. Xavier's a good man, she said finally. One of the best in the county, truth be told. But people talk, Mrs. Bennett. I understand, Molly said, her chest tight with disappointment. Another opportunity slipping away because of circumstances beyond her control. To her surprise, Mrs. Whittaker's expression softened. My late husband used to say, what people think of you is none of your business. Wise words, though hard to live by in a small town. She set down her teacup. We'll try your suggestion. You'll work from Xavier's place but come into town 3 times a week for fittings and to show me your progress. I'll pay you the same wage, minus the room and board. Relief washed over Molly. Thank you, Mrs. Whittaker. You won't regret it. See that I don't, the woman replied, but there was a hint of warmth in her voice. Margaret will be in tomorrow morning at 10 for her first fitting. I'll have the fabric and patterns ready by then. When Xavier found her later, Molly was practically glowing with excitement. I got the job, she told him as he helped her back into the wagon. Mrs. Whittaker agreed to let me work from the ranch and come in for fittings. Xavier smiled, that same transformative smile that lit up his entire face. That's wonderful news. I knew she'd see your talent. As they drove back to the ranch, Molly chattered about the wedding plans, the fabrics Mrs. Whittaker had described, and how this opportunity could lead to more work in the future. Xavier listened attentively, occasionally asking questions that showed genuine interest. "I hope you don't mind me suggesting that I work from your home," Molly said suddenly, realizing she should have consulted him first. "Not at all," Xavier assured her. "The place could use a woman's touch, and it's good to hear a voice besides my own around there." The casual comment made Molly wonder about Xavier's life before she and James had entered it. He rarely spoke about himself, though he was unfailingly kind and attentive. "You never married?" she asked, then immediately regretted the personal question. "I'm sorry, that's none of my business." "It's all right," Xavier said, keeping his eyes on the road. "No, I never married, came close once, but she decided ranch life wasn't for her. Moved to San Francisco with a banker instead." "I'm sorry," Molly said softly. Xavier shrugged. "It was for the best. She would have been miserable here and me alongside her. Better to know that before vows are exchanged than after." His practical acceptance of disappointment resonated with Molly. How different from her husband James, who had railed against fate and fortune, always believing the next big strike was just around the corner. "What about you?" Xavier asked. "How did you meet your husband?" Molly smiled at the memory. "He came into the dress shop where I was working. Said he needed a gift for his mother, but he kept coming back long after he'd bought her a handkerchief. Finally asked if he could call on me properly. He had good taste," Xavier said, then cleared his throat as if embarrassed by the compliment. The moment lingered between them, a quiet acknowledgement of something neither was ready to name. Then baby James stirred and began to fuss, breaking the spell. "Almost home," Xavier said, urging the horses to a slightly faster pace. "Home." The word echoed in Molly's mind. It had been so long since anywhere had felt like home. The following weeks fell into a rhythm. 3 days a week, Xavier would drive Molly and the baby into town for fittings and consultations with Mrs. Whittaker and her daughter Margaret. The rest of the time, Molly worked at the ranch. The main room transformed into a temporary sewing area where she could keep an eye on James while she worked. Xavier went about his ranch duties, tending to the small herd of cattle, maintaining fences, and handling the endless tasks required to keep the place running. But he always made time to check on Molly, bringing her tea or simply sitting with her for a few minutes to see her progress on the wedding gown. "It's coming along beautifully," he commented one evening, watching as Molly carefully attached delicate lace to the bodice of the dress. "Margaret has exquisite taste," Molly replied, not looking up from her precise stitches. "And Mrs. Whittaker spared no expense on the materials. The bride will outshine everyone at the wedding in that gown," Xavier said, "though I reckon certain seamstresses might give her competition." Molly glanced up, surprised by the compliment, to find Xavier watching her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "I doubt I'll be attending the wedding," she said, returning her attention to her work. "I'm just the dressmaker." "Mrs. Whittaker mentioned you'd been invited," Xavier said. "As a guest, not staff, did she?" Molly hadn't heard this. "That's unexpected, not really. Margaret's taken quite a liking to you from what I hear around town." It was true that the bride-to-be had been warm and friendly during their fittings, often lingering to coo over baby James or chat about her upcoming marriage to the town's young doctor. Still, an invitation to the social event of the season was surprising. "Will you go?" Xavier asked, his tone casual though something in his expression seemed important. Molly considered. I'd like to see Margaret wearing the finished gown, but I don't have anything suitable to wear to such an occasion. She gestured to her simple dress. And there's James to consider. Mrs. Whittaker mentioned the wedding will be in the afternoon, followed by a dinner and dancing. Xavier hesitated, then added, I could watch the boy for you. Molly stared at him. You would do that? Sure, Xavier said, though he looked slightly uncertain. He's a good baby. How hard could it be? Molly couldn't help laughing. Says the man who's never been alone with an infant before. Xavier grinned. I've birthed calves and broken wild horses. Surely one small human can't be more challenging. His confidence was endearing. Well, if you're certain, I would like to attend. Though the matter of what to wear remains. Xavier rose from his chair. I might have a solution for that too. Wait here. He disappeared into his bedroom and returned a moment later with a large wooden box. Setting it on the table beside Molly's sewing, he opened the lid to reveal folded fabric in a deep, rich green. This was my mother's, he explained, lifting the garment carefully. My sister took most of her things when she married, but she left this, saying it never suited her coloring. It was a dress of fine wool with subtle silk trim, simply cut but elegant in its design. The color was a deep forest green that would complement Molly's dark hair and fair skin perfectly. Xavier, it's beautiful, she breathed, reaching out to touch the fabric reverently. But I couldn't possibly. It's just gathering dust, he interrupted. My mother would have wanted it worn, not stored away in a box. She was about your size, maybe a little taller. Molly carefully refolded the dress. I'd be honored to wear it, thank you. Xavier nodded, seemingly pleased by her acceptance. It's settled then. You'll go to the wedding, see your handiwork admired by everyone in Chico, and I'll mind the boy. The idea of an evening to herself, her first since James was born, was both exciting and slightly terrifying. But as she looked at Xavier's sincere expression, Molly found herself looking forward to the occasion with unexpected anticipation. The day of the wedding arrived with perfect September weather, warm sunshine, clear blue skies, and a gentle breeze that carried the scent of late summer flowers. Molly had altered Xavier's mother's dress to fit her perfectly, taking in the waist and shortening the hem. The results were better than she could have hoped for. You look. Xavier trailed off, seemingly at a loss for words when Molly emerged from her room fully dressed for the wedding. She had arranged her hair in a more elaborate style than usual, with soft curls framing her face. Is it all right? She asked, suddenly self-conscious under his gaze. Xavier cleared his throat. More than all right. You look beautiful, Molly. The sincerity in his voice brought a flush to her cheeks. Thank you. She had spent the morning carefully instructing Xavier on James's routine when he would likely need feeding, how to change him, what to do if he became fussy. I've left a bottle of milk in the cold box, she explained, handing him a clean cloth for burping the baby. And there are clean diapers here, and Molly, Xavier interrupted gently, taking the cloth from her. We'll be fine, it's just a few hours, she nodded, trying to relax. I know. I've just never left him before. First time for everything, Xavier said, his blue eyes kind. Go, enjoy yourself. James and I will have a fine time together, won't we, little man? He tickled the baby's chin, eliciting a gummy smile that melted Molly's heart. All right, she conceded. But if there's any problem, any at all, the wedding is at the church just off the main street, Xavier reminded her. I know where to find you. With a final kiss to her son's forehead, Molly allowed Xavier to help her into the wagon. The drive to town was quiet, Molly alternating between anticipation and anxiety about leaving James. He'll be fine, Xavier assured her as if reading her thoughts. Babies are tougher than they look. It's not just him I'm worried about, Molly admitted with a small smile. It's you. Xavier laughed, the sound warm and genuine. Your confidence is overwhelming. When they reached the church, Xavier helped her down from the wagon. For a moment they stood facing each other, an odd tension between them. Have a good time, he said finally. You deserve it. Thank you, Molly replied, meaning it for far more than just this day. The wedding ceremony was lovely, the church decorated with wildflowers and ribbon. Margaret was radiant in her gown, the careful stitches of Molly's transforming the expensive fabric into a true work of art. The bride sought Molly out immediately after the ceremony, embracing her warmly. It's perfect, Margaret whispered. Better than I could have imagined. Everyone is asking who made my dress. Molly blushed at the praise. You're the one who makes it beautiful. Nonsense, Margaret laughed. Though I appreciate your modesty. Come, you must meet everyone. The reception was held at the Whittaker home, a large house at the edge of town with a garden spacious enough to accommodate tables for the guests. Molly found herself introduced to what seemed like half of Chico, from the mayor to the schoolteacher, all of whom expressed admiration for her work on the bridal gown. You've made quite an impression, Mrs. Whittaker commented, appearing at Molly's side with a glass of punch. I've already had 3 requests for your services from ladies who want new dresses for the Harvest Festival next month. Molly's eyes widened. Really? Indeed. I hope you don't mind, but I took the liberty of telling them you'd be continuing to work from Xavier's ranch for the time being, but would be available for consultations at the store. I don't mind at all, Molly said, thrilled at the prospect of more work. Thank you for recommending me, Mrs. Whittaker studied her over the rim of her punch glass. Xavier seems different since you arrived, more settled. Unsure how to respond to this observation, Molly sipped her own punch. He's a good man, Mrs. Whittaker continued. Been alone too long, if you ask me. Before Molly could formulate a reply, music started up. A fiddle, accordion, and guitar played by local men. Couples began to move toward the cleared area that would serve as a dance floor. Ah, the dancing is beginning, Mrs. Whittaker observed. You should join in. Oh, I don't think, Molly began, but was interrupted by the approach of a tall, well-dressed man she'd been introduced to earlier, Mr. Peterson, the bank manager. Mrs. Bennett, he said with a slight bow. Would you honor me with a dance? Caught off guard, Molly hesitated. She hadn't danced since before James was born. Go on, Mrs. Whittaker encouraged. Enjoy yourself. With a nod, Molly accepted Mr. Peterson's outstretched hand and allowed him to lead her to the dance floor. The music was lively, a reel that required concentration and quick footwork. After a few uncertain steps, muscle memory took over, and Molly found herself enjoying the movement and music. One dance led to another, and another after that, with different partners each time. Molly was surprised by how much fun she was having, how liberating it felt to be simply a young woman at a party rather than a widow or a mother or a seamstress. As the sun began to set and lanterns were lit around the garden, casting a golden glow over the festivities, Molly realized with a start how late it had become. James would need her. She began making her way toward Mrs. Whittaker to thank her and say her goodbyes when a familiar figure appeared at the garden gate. Xavier stood there, baby James cradled securely in one arm. The sight of him tall and steady, holding her son with such natural care, made Molly's heart skip a beat. She hurried over to them. Is everything all right? Everything's fine, Xavier assured her. But someone was getting mighty fussy about his dinner, thought it might be easier to bring him to you than the other way around. Molly reached for her son, who gurgled happily at the sight of her. You walked all the way from the ranch, took the wagon most of the way, Xavier explained. Parked it at the livery and walked from there. Figured the fresh air might help settle him. You should have just taken him home. I could have found a ride. Xavier shook his head. And have you missed the rest of the celebration? Besides, I wanted to see how the wedding turned out. Your dress was the talk of the church, from what I hear. Margaret's dress, Molly corrected automatically. Made by your hands, Xavier insisted. Mrs. Whittaker appeared beside them. Xavier Colt, I didn't expect to see you here. Just delivering a package, he said, nodding toward James. Someone was missing his mother. Well, since you're here, you might as well stay, Mrs. Whittaker declared. There's plenty of food left and the dancing will go on for hours yet. Xavier looked uncertain. I'm not really dressed for a wedding. It was true he wore his everyday clothes, clean but simple. Yet to Molly's eyes he looked more handsome than any of the formally dressed men she danced with that evening. Nonsense, Mrs. Whittaker said firmly. No one will mind. And I believe Mrs. Bennett could use a partner for the next dance, once young James has been taken care of. She gestured to a small room off the main parlor. You can use my sewing room for privacy, Molly. Take your time. With that, she bustled off to attend to other guests, leaving Molly and Xavier looking slightly bemused. That woman could organize an army, Xavier remarked, making Molly laugh. She certainly doesn't take no for an answer, Molly agreed. Let me feed James, then we can decide what to do. The sewing room was quiet and cozy, a welcome respite from the noise and activity of the party. As Molly nursed her son, Xavier waited outside the door, giving her privacy. When she emerged, James was drowsy but content. He'll sleep now, she told Xavier, but I should probably take him home. Xavier studied her face. You were enjoying yourself. I saw you dancing. I was, Molly admitted. It's been a long time since I've done anything like this. Then stay a while longer, Xavier suggested. James is asleep. We could put him in his basket in the wagon for a bit. It's a warm night and we'd check on him regularly. The idea was tempting. Are you sure you don't have to stay on my account? I'd like to stay, Xavier said simply. I'd like to dance with you, Molly. The directness of his statement caught her off guard. Oh. Unless you'd rather not, he added quickly. No, Molly found herself saying. I mean, yes, I'd like to dance with you too. They arranged James comfortably in his basket in the Whittakers' sitting room, where several older ladies volunteered to keep an eye on him. Then Xavier led Molly back to the garden, where the music had shifted to a slower, more melodic tune. He offered his hand with a formal bow that made her smile, then led her onto the dance floor. His arm around her waist was strong and secure, his hand holding hers warm and calloused from ranch work. They moved together with surprising ease, as if they'd danced together many times before. You dance well, Molly observed, looking up at him. My mother insisted, Xavier replied with a small smile. Said no son of hers would embarrass a lady on a dance floor. She was wise. She was. His expression turned thoughtful. She would have liked you, I think. The simple statement touched Molly deeply. I wish I could have met her. They continued to dance, conversation fading as the music surrounded them. Molly was acutely aware of Xavier's proximity, the subtle scent of soap and leather that she'd come to associate with him, the way his blue eyes never left her face. As the song ended, neither moved immediately to separate. For a heartbeat, Molly thought he might kiss her, right there among the lanterns and the flowers and the other dancers. Part of her wanted him to, but the moment passed and Xavier stepped back, though he kept hold of her hand. Another dance? He asked, his voice slightly rough. Molly nodded, not trusting herself to speak. They danced twice more before checking on James, who was still sleeping peacefully under the watchful eyes of the volunteer grandmothers. The evening continued, a perfect blend of celebration and quiet moments together, until the hour grew late and most of the guests had departed. We should head back, Xavier said finally, as the musicians packed away their instruments. It's a long ride to the ranch. The journey home was quiet, the night air cool and fragrant with sage and pine. James slept in Molly's arms, and beside her, Xavier guided the horses with sure hands. Above them, stars scattered across the vast California sky like diamonds on black velvet. "Thank you," Molly said softly, breaking the comfortable silence, "for watching James, for bringing him to me, for the dance." Xavier glanced at her, his profile illuminated by moonlight. "It was my pleasure, Molly, truly." When they reached the ranch, Xavier helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. Inside, Molly put James to bed while Xavier built up the fire against the night chill. "Tea," he offered when she returned to the main room. "Please." They sat before the fire, tea in hand, the events of the day settling around them like a comfortable blanket. "Did you enjoy yourself?" Xavier asked. "Very much," Molly replied. "It was good to feel normal again, like a woman, not just a widow or a mother." "You're all of those things," Xavier said thoughtfully, "and more besides." "What do you mean?" He turned to look at her directly, firelight dancing across his features. "You're strong, Molly, stronger than you know. To lose your husband, to travel alone with a baby, to rebuild your life from nothing, that takes remarkable courage." His words warmed her more than the tea or the fire. "I didn't feel courageous. I felt desperate." "Courage often looks like desperation from the inside," Xavier observed. "Doesn't make it any less brave." Molly considered this. "Perhaps you're right, though I couldn't have done it without help." She met his gaze steadily. "Without you." Xavier set down his teacup. "Molly, I want you to know that you and James are welcome here for as long as you wish to stay. There's no hurry for you to find your own place." The offer hung between them, weighted with unspoken meaning. Molly knew she should be making plans to move on, to establish her own household now that work was coming in. Yet the thought of leaving the ranch, of leaving Xavier, created a hollow feeling in her chest. "That's very generous," she said carefully, "but I can't impose on your kindness indefinitely." "It's not an imposition," Xavier said with quiet intensity. "Having you and James here, it's brought life back to this place, back to me." The admission, so honest and unguarded, made Molly's breath catch. "Xavier," he held up a hand, "you don't need to say anything. I know it's too soon. I know you're still grieving. I just wanted you to understand that you have a place here. Always." Molly studied his face, the sincerity in his eyes, the tension in his jaw as he waited for her response. This good, kind man who had taken in a stranger and her child, who had opened his home, and she was beginning to realize his heart. "Thank you," she said finally, reaching out to touch his hand. "For everything." His fingers curled around hers, warm and strong. They sat like that for a long time, hands joined, watching the fire burn low, neither needing to fill the silence with words. As autumn deepened, Molly's dressmaking business flourished. The success of Margaret's wedding gown had established her reputation in Chico, and orders came steadily: day dresses, evening wear, children's clothing, and even a commission for another wedding gown for a spring bride. Xavier had cleared out a small room at the back of the house for her to use as a proper workroom, installing better windows for light and building shelves for her growing collection of fabrics, threads, and notions. He'd even constructed a special cradle on rockers that could be gently pushed with a foot, allowing Molly to sew while keeping James entertained. "You're becoming quite the craftsman," Molly observed one evening as Xavier put the finishing touches on a small chest of drawers for her sewing supplies. "Had to learn to work with my hands," he replied, sanding a rough edge. "Ranch life demands it. Still, you have a gift for it," she insisted, running her fingers along the smooth wood. "These are beautiful pieces." Xavier looked pleased at her praise. "My father taught me the basics." Said a man should know how to build and fix things. He taught you well. James, now 6 months old and increasingly mobile, wiggled in his cradle, reaching for a wooden toy Xavier had carved for him, a little horse like the first one, but with a painted saddle and mane. "Someone's getting restless," Xavier observed, setting aside his tools to scoop up the baby. "How about we let your mother finish her work while we check on the animals?" James gurgled happily, his small hands patting Xavier's bearded cheeks. The sight of them together, the tall, strong rancher cradling her son with such natural ease, created a warmth in Molly's chest that had become familiar over the past months. "Don't keep him out too long," she cautioned. "It's getting colder." Xavier wrapped a small blanket around James. "We'll just say good night to the horses and come right back." Through the window, Molly watched them cross the yard to the barn, Xavier pointing things out to James as if the baby could understand every word. Her son's laughter drifted back to her on the evening breeze, a sound of pure joy that made her heart swell. How different their lives might have been if Xavier hadn't stopped to speak to her that day in Chico. If he hadn't offered his home and his help. If he hadn't said those simple words, "You stay." In the months since, those words had taken on new meaning. What had begun as temporary shelter had evolved into something deeper, more permanent. Xavier and the ranch had become home, not just a place to stay until something better came along. And Xavier himself had become what? A friend, certainly. A support and a comfort, but also something more, something that Molly was only beginning to acknowledge to herself. The flutter in her stomach when he smiled at her. The warmth that spread through her when their hands touched accidentally. The way she found herself watching him when he wasn't looking, admiring the strength in his shoulders as he worked, the gentleness in his hands as he cared for James. She was falling in love with him. The realization should have frightened her. Her husband had been gone less than a year. She had a child to consider, a fledgling business to maintain. The last thing she needed was the complication of feelings for the man whose roof she shared. Yet instead of fear, the knowledge brought a sense of rightness, of peace. As if her heart had made its decision long before her mind caught up. Whether Xavier felt the same remained uncertain. He was unfailingly kind, generous with his time and resources. He treated James as if the boy were his own son. But he had never spoken of his feelings beyond that night after the wedding, when he had told her she always had a place with him. Maybe that was enough for now. To know they were welcome, wanted. To build this life together day by day, whether or not it ever became more than what it was. Molly returned to her sewing, but her mind remained on Xavier and James, and the family they were becoming, whether they had a name for it yet or not. Later that night, after James was asleep, Molly found Xavier on the porch, a cup of coffee in his hands as he gazed at the stars. It was a clear night, cold but beautiful, with a full moon illuminating the ranch in silver light. "May I join you?" she asked, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Xavier stood immediately. "Of course. Let me get you a chair." "No need," Molly said, settling onto the wooden bench beside him. "This is fine." He sat back down, closer than before, his warmth a welcome barrier against the chill. "Beautiful night." Molly agreed, looking up at the vast expanse of stars. "I never saw skies like this back east." "One of the reasons I could never leave this place," Xavier admitted. "The land gets into your blood." "I can understand that now," Molly said. "When I first came west, all I saw was dust and hardship. Now I see the beauty too." They sat in companionable silence for a while, sharing the peaceful night. "Xavier," Molly said finally, gathering her courage, "I've been thinking about the future." He turned to look at her, his expression carefully neutral. "Oh, yes. With the dressmaking business doing well, I should be able to afford a small place in town soon." The words felt wrong even as she said them, but she needed to know where they stood. Xavier was silent for a long moment, his hands tightening around his coffee cup. "I see. It would be more convenient for customers," Molly continued, though her heart wasn't in the practical argument. "Of course," Xavier nodded. "Makes sense." Another silence fell, heavier than before. "Is that what you want?" Xavier asked finally, his voice low. "To move to town?" Molly took a deep breath. "No," his head snapped up, blue eyes searching her face. "No, no," she repeated, more firmly this time. "What I want, what I hope for." She paused, finding the right words. "James and I have been happy here, Xavier. Happier than I thought possible after losing my husband. You've given us so much more than shelter. You've given us a home." Xavier set down his cup, turning fully toward her. "Molly, please let me finish," she said gently. "I know it hasn't been very long. I know there might be talk in town about us living here together, but I don't want to leave, not unless you want us to." Xavier reached for her hand, holding it between both of his. "I don't want you to leave, ever." The simple declaration held such conviction that Molly felt tears prick her eyes. "I've been trying to find the right time, the right way to tell you," Xavier continued, his voice rough with emotion. "I love you, Molly. I love James as if he were my own son. I want you both to stay, not as guests, not as friends, but as my family." The words, so direct and heartfelt, left Molly speechless for a moment. "I know it's soon," Xavier rushed on, misinterpreting her silence. "I know you're still healing. We don't have to decide anything right now. I just needed you to know how I feel before you made plans to leave." Molly squeezed his hand. "It is soon," she acknowledged. "And there are days when I still miss James's father, when I feel guilty for being happy when he's gone." Xavier nodded, understanding in his eyes. "But," Molly continued, "I've learned that life doesn't always wait for the proper time. Sometimes joy comes when you least expect it, and the only sin would be in turning it away." She took a deep breath. "I love you too, Xavier. I think I have for some time now, and nothing would make me happier than for James and me to be your family." The smile that broke across Xavier's face was like sunrise after the longest night, brilliant, warm, full of promise. He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles with such reverence that Molly's heart seemed to expand in her chest. "Molly Bennett," he said softly, "would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" "Yes," she whispered, tears of happiness spilling onto her cheeks. "Yes, I will." Xavier pulled her gently into his arms, one hand cradling the back of her head as his lips found hers in a kiss that felt like coming home after a long journey. Tender at first, then deepening with the months of unspoken longing between them. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the wedding," he admitted. Molly laughed softly. "I wished you had." "I wasn't sure if you were ready," Xavier said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I didn't want to rush you. And now," she asked, her eyes meeting his, "now I never want to let you go." He kissed her again, more briefly this time, but with no less feeling. They stayed on the porch for a long time, talking, planning, dreaming of the future they would build together. The night grew colder around them, but Molly had never felt warmer, safer, more certain of where she belonged. The wedding was a simple affair, held on Christmas Eve in the small church in Chico. The building was decorated with evergreen boughs and red berries, candles casting a golden glow over the proceedings. Molly wore a dress of ivory silk that she had made herself, with a pattern of small pearls embroidered across the bodice. Xavier, handsome in a new suit, watched with undisguised adoration as she walked down the aisle toward him, baby James in Mrs. Whittaker's arms nearby. Their vows were traditional, but spoken with such sincere emotion that many in the congregation dabbed at their eyes. When the reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Xavier's kiss was both reverent and passionate, a promise of the life they would share. The celebration afterward was held at the ranch, the house filled with friends who had come to mean so much to them in the short time they'd been in Chico. There was food and music and dancing, laughter and good wishes. James, now 7 months old, was passed from one adoring pair of arms to another, his sunny disposition and ready smile winning hearts throughout the evening. As the night deepened and guests began to depart, Mrs. Whitaker pulled Molly aside for a quiet word. "I knew from the moment I saw you two together," she said with satisfaction. "Some things are simply meant to be." "You played matchmaker quite skillfully," Molly observed with a smile. Mrs. Whitaker waved away the compliment. "You two did all the work. I merely provided opportunities." She patted Molly's hand. "Be happy, my dear. You've both earned it." Later, when the house was quiet and James was asleep in his cradle in what would now be the nursery rather than Molly's room, the newlyweds stood together before the fire in the main room. "Mrs. Colt," Xavier said, drawing Molly into his arms. "I like the sound of that." "So do I," Molly agreed, her hands resting on his chest. "Though I may still use Bennett professionally, I've established a reputation under that name." "Whatever you prefer," Xavier said easily, "as long as I get to call you my wife." Molly stretched up to kiss him, still marveling that this remarkable man was now her husband. "I never imagined when I sat on that bench with James that my life would take such a turn." "Providence," Xavier said softly, "or fate, or just good fortune. Whatever it was, I thank God for it every day." He kissed her again deeply, his arms tightening around her. "Come to bed, wife," he whispered against her lips. "Let me show you how much I love you." Their first night as husband and wife was everything Molly could have hoped for: tender, passionate, a true joining of bodies and hearts. Xavier's touch was both gentle and sure, his whispered words of love and desire making her feel cherished beyond measure. In his arms, Molly found healing for the wounds of her past and hope for the future they would build together. Spring came to the ranch with a riot of wildflowers and new life. The cattle Xavier had been carefully breeding produced healthy calves. The vegetable garden Molly had expanded yielded its first tender shoots, and business continued to flourish with orders from as far away as Sacramento for her distinctive dressmaking. James was growing too, taking his first uncertain steps across the wooden floor of the main room, his face alight with triumph as he tottered from Molly's outstretched hands to Xavier's waiting arms. His first word had been "Mama," but his second, to Molly's delight, had been "Papa," a name Xavier wore with visible pride. "He thinks of you as his father," Molly had said when she first heard James call Xavier by that name. "And you are, in all the ways that matter." Xavier had been unable to speak, his eyes suspiciously bright as he gathered the boy close, one large hand cradling the back of James's small head. On a perfect day in May, as the sun cast long afternoon shadows across the land, Molly found Xavier in the small orchard they had planted the previous autumn. He was examining the young trees, checking for signs of disease or damage. "They're looking healthy," she commented, coming to stand beside him. "We might have fruit next year." "That's the hope," Xavier agreed, slipping an arm around her waist. "How's your day been? Productive?" "I finished Mrs. Peterson's dinner dress and started on the new curtains for our bedroom." She leaned into his side, content in the simple pleasure of his presence. "And James, napping finally. He was determined to stay awake all day, it seems." Xavier chuckled. "Stubborn like his mother." Molly poked him gently in the ribs. I prefer to call it determined. That too, Xavier agreed amiably. He studied her face for a moment. You look tired. Are you feeling all right? I'm fine, Molly assured him. Just a little queasy this morning. It passed quickly. Xavier's eyebrows rose. Queasy in the morning. Molly nodded, a smile spreading across her face. Yes, for the third day in a row, understanding dawned in Xavier's eyes. Molly, are you? I think so, she confirmed. It's early days yet, but all the signs are there. With a whoop of joy, Xavier lifted her off her feet, spinning her in a circle that made her laugh and clutch at his shoulders. When he set her down, his expression was a mix of awe and delight. A baby, he said wonderingly. Our baby. Molly nodded, her own happiness reflected in his face. Our family is growing. Xavier placed a gentle hand on her still flat stomach. Hello, little one, he said softly, then looked up at Molly with such love that her heart seemed too full to contain it. Thank you. For what? For sitting on that bench and waiting. For staying when I asked you to, for loving me, for everything. Molly rose on tiptoe to kiss him, sweet and lingering. I'm the one who should be thankful. You saved us, Xavier. He shook his head. We saved each other. As the sun dipped lower on the horizon, casting the ranch in golden light, Molly and Xavier walked hand in hand back to the house where their son slept peacefully. Inside, a fire burned in the hearth, supper waited on the stove, and the rooms were filled with the simple, beautiful evidence of their life together. Xavier's books beside Molly's sewing basket, James's toys scattered on the rug, family photographs on the mantel. Outside, the west stretched vast and sometimes harsh. But here, within these walls, they had created something precious and enduring, a love that had begun with a chance encounter on a bench in Chico, with a woman alone, a baby in her arms, and a cowboy who had simply said, "You stay." Those two words had changed everything. And as the years passed, as their family grew with the birth of a daughter the following winter and another son 2 years after that, as the ranch prospered and their love deepened, they never forgot the providence that had brought them together: a desperate woman, a compassionate man, and the courage to begin again. Every year on the anniversary of the day they met, Xavier and Molly would visit Chico and sit for a few minutes on the bench where their story began. Sometimes with their children, sometimes just the two of them. A reminder of how far they had come and how blessed they were to have found each other. The best decision I ever made, Xavier would say, his hand holding Molly's, was telling you to stay. And Molly, looking at the life they had built together, the love, the family, the home, would always reply with the same words. The best decision I ever made was listening.